Ernährung wird immer ein wichtiges Thema sein, egal ob für Tier oder ob Mensch. Und daran Teile zu beitragen zu können, finde ich sehr klasse.
Es ist total spannend, verschiedenste Rohkomponenten aus verschiedensten Regionen zusammenzustellen, zusammenzumischen, Rezepturen daraus zu erstellen. Macht unwahrscheinlich viel Spaß, sich in diesem Feld zu bewegen.
Wir Menschen erhalten täglich hochwertige tierische Lebensmittel von unseren Nutztieren. Eine optimale Versorgung der Tiere ist deshalb überaus wichtig. Die Basis hierfür liefert unsere Branche. Wir produzieren das Futter. Rund 10.000 Menschen arbeiten daran jeden Tag. Mit Herzblut. Die optimale Versorgung der Tiere ist die zentrale Aufgabe überhaupt. Futterhersteller helfen hierbei mit jeweils passgenauem Futter. In bedarfsgerechten Mengen und in bester Qualität. Das erfordert ein hohes Verantwortungsbewusstsein und großes Engagement. Dabei bestimmen Nachhaltigkeit und Tierwohl unser Handeln.
Heutzutage ist das Tierwohl wieder ein interessantes Thema und wichtiges Thema. Und auch wir versuchen über die Tierernährung am Wohl des Tieres positiv beizutragen.
Die Betriebe entwickeln ihre Werke und damit Arbeitsumfelder ständig weiter. Unsere Werke fertigen auf Basis der neuesten wissenschaftlichen und technischen Erkenntnisse. So sind wir für Kundenwünsche und neue Situationen gut aufgestellt.
Die Herausforderungen für die Zukunft sind sicherlich auch, das Gesundheitsmanagement nach vorne zu treiben. Da können wir als Futtermittelproduzent ganz klar eine führende Rolle mit einnehmen.
Unser Futter. Für die Tiere, für die Lebensmittel, für die Zukunft. Wir machen Tiernahrung.
Sustainable feed for sustainable food. Today we are talking about global solutions for climate resilience and climate protection through animal nutrition in the livestock sector. Welcome everybody to this hour, to this interesting lecture. And the use of animal feed is of great importance in the value chain, in the animal value chain for producing meat, eggs, and dairy products and ensure supply. The international flow of goods from import of raw materials to export of food demands responsibility from the economy by reducing the ecological burden, while at the same time ensuring economic efficiency and resilience for the markets in case of crisis and pandemics. With this panel, the European feed industry would like to present the global and local possibilities for reducing the ecological footprints of feed for special animals, illustrate the effects for achieving climate protection goals, and discuss concrete options for solutions in the procurement of agricultural raw materials. We will also highlight potential for the development of further measures, including bilateral government agreements and their limitations. And now we would like to include you as participants, and I would like to start now the lecture with the first speaker. Welcome to Mr. Wolfgang Trunk. Mr. Wolfgang Trunk is Policy Officer in the European Commission, DG Sante, and he will explain the EU approach contributing sustainable feed and food. Welcome, Mr. Trunk.
Thank you, Mr. Barken, and welcome everybody from my side, from Brussels. I'm very pleased that I have the opportunity to elaborate a little bit and to explain a little bit what happened in the EU in the last years and last month in terms of improving sustainability of the whole food systems. You will know that feed is a crucial part in this chain. Therefore, I want to start with my presentation with the Green Deal. And so maybe I have the next slide. The Green Deal was published by the new Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, in December 2019, and it is our flagship now in the whole Commission. Within this Green Deal, there were many specific action plans or projects, And for us today, one is extremely important, which is the so-called farm-to-fork strategy. But before digging further into the farm-to-fork strategy, let me elaborate a little bit on all the others. Not all the others, but let me pick out some of the other initiatives that are also contained and that have an impact on our feed sector. Of course, the energy union is one area where a transition to a more greener economy is crucial. And you might know that energy is, especially renewable energy, there is a big effort to increase substantially the renewable energy primary sources, and there we have with the feed industry to balance out the things in the food chain. But there is also others area like the zero pollution action, where we have, for instance, ammoniac emissions from livestock farming, which has also where we have also an interface with feeding. We have other areas, but I think these are the two most important from the other actions within the Green Deal, apart from the farm to fork. On farm to forks, next slide, please. Also very important, when people hear about the farm to fork, everybody just thinks about environmental sustainability, but we consider sustainability as a whole. That means a holistic approach covering three pillars. Of course, one is the environmental pillar, but there is also a social pillar. The social pillar means, on the one hand, that we want to assure that the food is still affordable, that the food is healthy, but also that we don't leave anybody behind. That means also that the farmers must have their income. And this brings me to the third important pillar, which is the economic sustainability. So we have seen, especially due to also enforced through to the COVID crisis, that it is very important to have the resilience of the food chains, of the delivery channels is assured, and therefore the economic sustainability is also in our focus when we discuss the future food systems. Next slide, please. Yes, we know that the animal nutrition is embedded in the farm to fork strategy. So we have one area is the fight for against antimicrobial resistance. This is one of the biggest societal threats already, and we ensured that we foresee let's say animal nutrition, modern animal nutrition, as part of the solution to make progress in the fight against AMR. We have also we are working on a contingency plan to increase the resilience in crisis situations. There are also, of course, food as the start of the food chain. Feed as the start of the food chain has a crucial role to play. We have also launched the revision of the feed additive regulation, and there a specific emphasis is that we are aware, and we want to boost these feed additives with a benefit for the environment. And then we have also kind of check that we have in terms of our food hierarchy, that we only dedicate biomass which is no more eligible for human food, neither for animal feed. Only such biomass should be burned as biofuel. And the last point where the farm to fork has an impact on feed is the green claims, which is an initiative from DG Environment, and it is about substantiation of green claims and what is allowed in the area of green claims. On these issues, I will dig a little bit deeper later on. Next slide, please. Yes, I already mentioned that just before we published our communication, the Farm to Fork strategy, COVID started, the COVID-19 pandemic started. So what made us aware was that our systems are vulnerable and that we have to work to make actions to make the food chain more resilient, and so this is just strengthening our the strategy in this strand that was already established, but COVID made it even more important. Next slide. Yes, I think I can rather be quick on this, on the so-called targets, 2030 targets. We have 4 targets. The most important for us, or the 2 most important for us, here are the target to increase, to improve nutrient management, to reduce nutrient losses, and there also animal nutrition has a big role to play. And the second area I already mentioned, the target to reduce the sales of antimicrobials, and that implies also that we make that we get action, undertake actions in the area of better animal nutrition systems. Next slide. Yes, also with an impact on the feed industry, our big efforts in terms of reducing food waste. There also, you are aware that we want to valorize any let's say former food that is no more intended or for the humans. That the next step in the hierarchy would be that it is valorized as animal feed. Next slide. Yes, I think on the concrete actions, on the overarching actions, I think they are not so very concrete. Therefore, I will skip them in terms of, because you might have read them, everybody who read the communication. The contingency plan is already on its way in terms of the preparation. So we are working hard, and the stakeholders are already involved in developing this contingency plan. Next slide. Yeah, in terms of the primary production of food, we have several areas. I will keep it short in terms of the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy. There we have a lot of actions to incorporate, enshrine our farm to fork objectives into the CAP. Then we have also the action plan for integrated nutrient management. This is something, a horizontal commission task where feed could also play a role. And yes, the pesticides is not so important for us today. Therefore, next slide. Yeah, there on the big actions in the action plan also mentioned is, of course, the revision of the feed additive regulation, which is, we are working not day and night, but a lot on this, my colleagues and me. And we hope to come up with a legislative proposal by the end of this year. Next slide. Yes, I have some other concrete actions that might be of your interest. We are also at a already very, let's say, made big progress and advanced stage on the so-called relaxation of the feed ban. That means we intend to authorize pig pups for poultry and poultry pups for pigs, and also insect pups for pigs and poultries. So this is something that we expect in a short term already, or let's say in a short term in terms of a few months. The other thing is the feed to increase the sustainability of the feed materials. There we are working hard on the next revision of the catalog of feed materials, where we want to ensure that these novel feed materials that are popping up, that are emerging, that they are safely introduced into the feed chain. Okay, and the next slide, please. Yes, this is one thing I already mentioned. DG Environment makes a big legislative proposal to come up with the so-called green claims regulation. Also for this, we hope to come up by the end of the year. It is not only about, but one core option issue will be how the methodology, to come to a harmonized methodology for green claims. And we are fully involved. My food colleagues and me are fully involved in this current impact assessment, to properly mirror what is already the situation, what do we have already available in the feed additive and feed marketing regulation, and then we will, let's say, ensure that the food and feed legislation is properly covered by this new initiative. Next slide. Next slide. We might have two more. Yes. Also in the Green Deal Farm to Fork, of course, it is a transition. It is a green transition, and of course, for this you need research. You need nonetheless, and you need financial investments, and you need training. This is for what this slide stands for, that we are really also investing in new research projects to further improve to further create new instruments, new options for more sustainable food systems. And also we are checking investments to support the transition into a more sustainable food production. And now the next slide will be the slide about the international pillar of the Farm to Fork. Of course, we know that we are not in Iceland in the EU. If we want to have progress in terms of climate, in terms of many other environmental objectives, we must go big, go global. And this is on this slide you find our activities to have this kind of dissemination or outreach of what we develop here in the EU. And the next slide should be my last slide. Yes, it is just and again the slide for the Farm to Fork. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and I am ready to questions now, or also I'm available for the deep dive, which is announced later on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Trunk. This was a very important overview, and it shows clearly that we have a very complex situation coming from all the programs, and animal nutrition will play an important part on that. Definitely, especially one point was circular economy, which is important, and so everything is concerned. And with that, I would like to hand over to Professor Wilhelm Windisch from the Technical University in Munich, and he's talking about bioeconomy. And by the way, for all of you, for the participants, please use the chat for questions, which will be answered later by the panelists in the discussion or in the deep dive. Please, Mr. Windisch, start. And please keep the time.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to try my best. Dr. Barken, thank you very much for this kind introduction and also for invitation. I would like to talk for the next 5 minutes about animal-based circular economy or bioeconomy, which is basically the same. And let me start with a statement. 1 kilogram of plant-based human food produces at the same time 4 kilograms of livestock feed, of non-edible biomass. And this correlation, this inevitable coupling, so this is very easy to be explained because we have byproducts, we have co-products, crop rotation, and absolute grassland in our agricultural production system. Byproduct, just for example, if you buy 1 kilogram of rapeseed oil, there is more than 1 kilogram of residues from the rape seeds. 1 kilogram of cereal produces more than 1 kilogram of straw, and so on. And if you sum up these principles, you get a figure of 80% of total agricultural biomass that is not edible by humans. And this huge amount of biomass contains huge amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus and other plant nutrients. And these nutrients must be recycled in order to keep the plant production running. So how to recycle non-edible biomass with all this nitrogen and phosphorus? So in principle, there are 3 strategies. One strategy would be just to leave it on the field. I called it the vegan strategy. Unfortunately, this is inefficient because the release of nitrogen and phosphorus is not synchronized with the need of the plants. Or you can do it, you can put it in the biogas plant. Then you get a very efficient fertilizer, but methane you cannot eat. If you feed it to livestock, then you get a very efficient fertilizer, and at the same time you get a very valuable human food. So this is a win-win situation, and this win-win situation is also the most efficient one. I'd like to show it here in this example. This is very new data comparison of organic farms, of organic plant production systems along the complete crop rotation, and doing the vegan strategy, the biogas strategy, and keeping dairy cows. And you quickly see that the plant productivity, the cereal units per hectare and year, all over the complete crop rotation period is only half if you do this just leaving on the field. And here you see the reason. It is a very bad nitrogen efficiency, which means that you also produce emissions into the environment. So livestock is the most efficient recycler of non-edible biomass and associated nitrogen and phosphorus. And this is the reason why we need to have livestock. Next slide. Here is in this slide, I would like to show or to compare some production systems of animal-derived products. And just one slide showing carbon footprints related to edible protein. Kilogram CO2 equivalents per kilogram of edible protein. Edible protein because this is a very simple way to compare milk, meat, eggs. And what you quickly can see is that with rising performance, the carbon footprint is going down very steep, but the major difference is species and category. And beef meat produces high emissions, chicken meat, very low one. So the consequence, usually you would say, okay, let's kick out beef meat and that lets us increase the production of chicken meat because of environmental impact. But if we do this, we step into a next problem. We get a trade-off with food competition. I would like to show this in this graph. Here you see the amount of protein you can get with 1 kilogram of feed dry matter. 1 kilogram of feed dry matter produces about 80-90 grams of protein with chicken meat and only 8-10 grams with beef meat. So this is factor 10. And again, it shows that chicken meat is highly efficient. But at the same time, we produce this chicken meat with edible biomass. Most of the chicken diets are edible. It is simply human food. And the consequences, you see it in the globe, that globally 85% of soybean harvest is fed to animals. 1/3 of cereal harvest is fed to animals, mainly to chicken and to pigs. So, and this is something we cannot continue with in the future because there's a rising limitation of available agricultural area. We need to feed human food to humans and not to animals. So we must find a way anywhere in between this trade-off. The challenge is to optimize transformation efficiency of non-edible biomass into human food. How can we do this? So I have three paths. It's first, make maximum use of non-edible biomass as livestock feed. Maximum use means that we should look for the most efficient harvest and preservation methods. This means not hay, but silage. Improve feed quality. Plant breeding can do a lot in this aspect. Avoid nutritional limitations, essential amino acids, minerals, vitamins, wherever we need it. And improve digestive capacity, feed enzymes, gut health stabilizers. And this leads automatically to the next step, which is minimizing excess supply of nitrogen and phosphorus to livestock. I do not need to talk on this point because there's another speaker, the next speaker or the overnext speaker, which would address this. And the third line is, of course, minimizing maintenance requirements of livestock systems. It's longevity, it's animal health, which is, of course, an important aspect of circular economy and of bioeconomy. And only 3 words about some dead-end pathways. So many people talk about imitates of livestock products being an alternative, like soy milk or oats milk. Well, this it's just boosting non-edible biomass generation. Or artificial meat. Artificial meat would boost food competition because the pure substrates for culture media are produced out of human food. So we can talk on this later in the discussion. So these 3 aspects are the major themes and topics we need to improve the aspects, the animal production in view of circular economy. So that's it for the moment. Thank you for attention. And I would like to give back to the Regie.
Thank you, Mr. Windisch. That was really a good start. And so I would say a little bit also provoking people who are against livestock products. We come back to that later. And I have already 2 questions which will be handled by us later in the discussion. But let me hand over to Dr. Gert van Duinkerken, who is Business Unit Manager of Wageningen Livestock Research. So he is working especially on animal nutrition, and he is a co-founder of the Center of Animal Nutrition in the Netherlands. So please start with your presentation. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and also thank you for the opportunity to be in dialogue about animal nutrition and circularity. I would like to start with some challenges and some trends which all relate to animal nutrition and the animal nutrition of the future. Well, first of all, we see that the ecological footprint of food production is really a hot topic, and that includes the reduction of nitrogen losses like ammonia emission, but it also is about closing the phosphorus cycle and also the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and that is both off-farm emissions, so from the fields to the farm gate, but also the on-farm emissions, including the animal efficiency. Especially in Europe, we also see a trend towards local sourcing and protein self-sufficiency. In the European Union, about 78% of the animal feed proteins is originating from Europe itself. And that means that about 20% of the animal feed proteins is being imported from other continents. And if we want to reduce such imports, well, we can either increase the European protein production, or we can work on increasing the protein use efficiency, or we can also look at possibilities to decrease the protein demands, for example, by working with lower protein contents in the animal diets. There's also a lot of interest nowadays in sustainable sourcing guidelines for animal feed raw materials, and I think that also FEFAC is indicating that in this conference. already mentioned, circularity is also a hot topic. And in the perspective of animal nutrition, that means that we are looking at opportunities for the full use, the entire use of biomass. And that is also including the co-products, the residues, and the fractions coming from biorefinery processes. With this circular concepts, we have to take into account that food and feed safety is also a key issue, because with this circular concepts, we also are looking at the risk of accumulation of contaminants. In many countries, and especially in Europe, we see that targets are being set to reduce food losses and also food waste. And for the animal feed sector, there is the challenge to look at opportunities how to reuse such food waste streams or food losses again as an ingredient and input for the animal feed sector. And finally, from the consumer perspective, we see an increasing demand of non-GMO food chains and food products. And it also obviously has a consequence for the animal feed chain. But how can animals and the feed chain contribute to circular agri-food systems? Well, first of all, it's about the ability, the biological ability of animals to convert co-products, residues, and biomass from marginal lands into high-quality proteins for human nutrition. And by doing so, animals can provide about 1/3 of our daily protein without causing competition for land between food and feed. So if we would look at a fully plant-based food system, then we would actually need more land than in a situation where animals are included in the food system. So that's important to take notice of. In the next decade, also as a result of this trend towards circularity, I think that we will see quite some changes in animal nutrition. We are facing more and more raw materials with high fiber, high carbohydrate concentrations, often with a lower digestibility and with a less optimal amino acid composition. And we can be facing higher concentrations or new types of anti-nutritional factors which could have some limitations related to nutrient digestibility. There's also a high interest in novel feed materials, for example, seaweeds and microalgae as examples of aquatic proteins, but also different types of insects and insect products, local protein crops like legume crops, but also already mentioned by one of the previous speakers, the reintroduction of processed animal proteins, for example, in the diets of pork and the diets of poultry. If we go more towards this circularity in the agri-food system, then I think that we should also shift our focus and focus more on the overall agroecological efficiency. How can we make the best use of our residues and our co-products and the crop residues, and not focus so much anymore on the feed conversion ratio of the animal as such. So that is of a less high priority, I think, in a circular concept. In all cases, resilience of animals and also the well-being of animals remains a key issue. In fact, if we are thinking about the feeds of the future, I think that we should also think about how we optimize the matchmaking between feeds of the future and the animals of the future. And that requires a lot of good communications and collaborations between animal breeding companies and animal nutrition sector. So finally, to summarize what is needed, I think we basically mainly need nature-based solutions. So make use of the biological potential of not only farm animals, but also of fungi, bacteria, insects, and fish to upgrade biomass and residues and co-products. And also we should change our focus and not only look at optimization within a specific production chain, like a plant production chain or an animal production chain, but also look at optimization of the more integrated system, including the soil, the plant, and the animal, and take the whole system into account. Of course, we can also use a lot of support by technological innovations. For example, new opportunities for the fractionation of biomass, which enables us to use individual components of this biomass and also look for opportunities to valorize such components in the best way and in the most sustainable way. Also, processing of raw materials, but also of compound feeds offers good opportunities to further increase the resource use efficiency. Enzyme technologies can be of support, for example, to help us to make better use of the fiber fraction in biomass and in residues, but also other feed additives, for example, the use of amino acids, but also additives to support intestinal health can really help us to maintain an efficient system with also a high resource use efficiency. For innovation and for research, I think that both focus on biological and also technological solutions is needed, but moreover that we need to focus on the integral aspects of sustainability, and also with doing that, taking into account both the production side, but also the consumption side of the food system. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to being in further dialogue with you later on or in the deep dive session.
Thank you, Mr. Dunkerken. That was really a good overview, and I see that we have the perspective, especially underlined and especially supported by science, to find new solutions in that area. Thank you very much. And then with that, I would hand over to Jan Dijkstra. Jan Dijkstra is an associate professor of animal nutrition in Wageningen. So he is focusing on the methane emissions and reduction of the emissions from ruminants and their contribution to climate protection. Welcome, and start please your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So indeed, my presentation will be about reduction of methane emissions from ruminants in order to mitigate climate change. And as discussed by the previous speakers, the major role of the ruminants is in a circular bioeconomy, in that the ruminants will utilize feed that is not edible by humans and convert it into nutritious milk or meat. But by doing this, this goes at a cost. And one of the costs is actually methane. Methane being formed in the rumen of the ruminants. And methane is a powerful greenhouse gas, and it represents the majority of the carbon footprint of ruminant products globally. So somewhere between 43 and 63%. And therefore, we'd like, obviously, to cut down on the methane production of ruminants. Now, in doing so, we have to realize a major difference between the most well-known greenhouse gas, which is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas which stays in the atmosphere basically for centuries. It's hardly broken down. What does it mean? It means that if the carbon dioxide that we emit today will stay in the atmosphere for decades or centuries, and will therefore keep on warming the Earth. So in order to avoid further warming, we need to cut down carbon dioxide basically to zero levels. However, methane is a short-lived climate pollutant. It has a lifetime of only 12 years. It's basically broken down by hydroxyl radicals in the atmosphere. And that means if we can reduce methane emissions, for example, from livestock, in such a way there is an equilibrium with the removal of methane from the atmosphere, then that methane emission will not give rise to further warming. So that's a great opportunity to avoid climate change in a major way. Now, we're not very successful yet in reducing methane emissions. In the EU, for example, methane emissions from livestock has basically stayed constant in the past 10 years or so. But there are major opportunities in order to reduce methane emissions from ruminants. And the first one is to look at the roughage part of the diet. Our ruminants usually consume a large part of the diet is roughage. And what I've shown here in this slide is the relationship between the fiber content of grass or grass silage as being the major roughage or forage utilized in Europe or globally, if you like. And you see here the methane emission expressed in grams of methane per unit of useful product for the animal, so per unit of digestible organic matter. Now, if you've got a low fiber content of the grass or grass silage, that means you have a grass or a grass silage that is grazed or harvested at a young stage, immature, leafy grass, then the methane emissions of that grass will be up to 50% lower than a grass or a grass silage which has a very high fiber content. So a grass that is mature, is stemmy, and is difficult to digest for the animals. And these are results obtained with dairy cattle. It's not well known if that's also applicable to, for example, sheep or beef cattle. But a major management option here in practice to reduce methane emissions. Other options related to roughage include replacing grass silage with corn silage that may reduce methane emissions by, say, 5 to 15%. And it's well known that this is also applicable to beef cattle. Or, for example, another option is to include forages which are rich in tannins, like sainfoin, like lucina. And this option is valid for all kinds of ruminants, including sheep. Now, next to roughage options, there's also developments in dietary supplements and feed additives. And the first one that it can be used from today onwards, basically, is to include fat in the diet. Fat is not fermented by the microbes in the rumen, and therefore it does not give methane, but it does give energy to the animal. And if you include fat in the diet, there are good options to reduce methane by, say, 5 to 15%. A second option I'd like to mention is nitrate. Nitrate can be utilized already in order to add nitrogen to the diet if microbes are short of nitrogen. Or you could also replace other nitrogen sources in the diet with nitrate. And nitrate consumes hydrogen, and that hydrogen cannot be utilized any longer to synthesize methane. And therefore, methane will be reduced by, say, 10 to 20%. That's a good opportunity to be utilized in practice. The third one I'd like to mention is a compound called 3-nitroxypropanol. It's a small molecule which inhibits methanogenesis in the rumen in the very final step. It's very powerful. It reduces methane by some 20 to 40%. And at the moment, it's in the final process of being approved in Europe by the European Food and Safety Association. And the final one, which is a potential game changer, is red seaweed, Asparagopsis. Red seaweed may reduce methane in research by 30 to 80%. And that's a lot, obviously. And it does so because it contains bromine haloforms. And at the same time, that is kind of the worry with those seaweeds, because those compounds, in particular bromoform, they are known to be involved in destruction of the ozone layer. Bromoform is potentially carcinogenic. It's potentially toxic to animals and humans. So we need to find ways to utilize the red seaweed in a safe way, both for the animals and in terms of the products. These are the most promising dietary supplements and additives. And the nice thing is that they can be applied and they are effective for all kinds of ruminants, dairy, beef, cattle, also sheep. But obviously, they're not for free. It costs money, and it's also a whole issue of how farmers will then have to be paid for this reduced methane when they apply those supplements. So with that, I leave you with this summary of methane mitigation strategies in terms of reduction potential and time to market. And I'm looking forward to further discussions in this panel, and I'm also available in the deep dive. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dijkstra. And I think that this clear message is that we need also, once more research. And Mr. Trunk has already shown some of the programs which are available for that. And on the other hand is to transform the research into praxis. That's the other point. So before we start now the discussion and pick up some of the questions from the chat, I would like to include the audience and ask you via a short survey, only a short survey. And the question is, in which areas of animal nutrition do you expect potential to improve the climate situation? And please add only one word, and we will see which words are and which topics are important so that we can include this in the discussion. Once more, the question, in which areas of animal nutrition do you expect potential to improve the climate situation? Please answer now. And we are very interested to hear what are the main topics and what are the highlights. So we have 1 minute to answer, so you have enough time to think about that. And I think there we have had a lot of ideas and a lot of inspiring facts from the different speakers here, more from the Commission side, which is more administration, and on the other hand, yeah, what is science expecting for the future? And I'm very happy to have people here who are independent and independent from the business, so they can really, obviously, very openly and honestly give an answer. What is the way where we are go to concerning environment and concerning the climate change, and how can we include animal nutrition in that? So asking my back office about the results, can you give me a feedback with the cloud? I'm expecting the result. But by the way, I can start already questions, and I have a question to Mr. Trunk. And the question is, what are the main challenges with legislations in Europe to implement the food waste usage in animal feed? So that means the non-eligible. So we have seen already the results. Mr. Trunk, could you please answer my first question?
Yes, of course I can. Well, food waste. It is first of all the discussion: what is food waste about, and if we count also the famous catering waste. If we are addressing this, then we have huge quantities at stake. And there it would be a big legislative change necessary, namely the so-called annual byproduct regulation, which would have to go on a co-decision procedure, which takes many years. So this is something that would at least take 5 years until this could be, let's say, reality. But the closer areas are maybe food. Form of food which contains animal meat and fish, which is currently not authorized, not eligible for food producing animal feed, but we are envisaging an EFSA opinion about the safe inclusion of form of food with meat and fish as animal feed for food producing animals. This is let's say a little bit a shorter term, and these are the two main policy legislations that would have to be changed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And question to Mr. Deinkeuken is in which way insects could play a role, could play a solutions?
Yeah, insects is very interesting, I think, and in fact, also relating to the question you had for the word cloud, I think that we should try to make good evaluations of how we can connect the right animal species to the right type of biomass or substrate. So I think that we can make some advantage in efficiency if we use the right substrates for the right animal species. And insects can be a very good direct step or an intermediate step from biomass in the end to animal to food for animals, but also to food for humans.
Okay, so we will come back to the discussion later once more, because I have some questions in the chat concerning soybean reduction in feed ratios, but therefore I can hand over to the next speaker, who can start now his presentation, which is Asbjørn Børsting, the FIFAC president, the president of the European Feed Manufacturers Association. And one comment before we start, you will miss Andre Nasser from Brazil, who was invited to participate and who unfortunately has cancelled shortly his participation. I apologize for this message for you. And therefore we start directly with Asbjørn, who will now focus on some points concerning the calculating the ecological footprint and sourcing guidelines.
Thank you very much, Herman Josef, for the opportunity to speak about our work in the European Feed Manufacturers Association, FIFAC, concerning primarily deforestation, free soy supply chains. In FIFAC, we launched last year in September a new sustainability charter 2030, where we, based on many analyses and discussions, try to cover the main aspects of sustainability in the feed sector. The charter contains 5 chapters, each covering an area of our sustainability challenges, and, as we see it, also opportunities. We call each of them an ambition. We realize that they are, to a high degree, interrelated to each other, but we have, with these 5 ambitions, created a kind of structure in our work. Each ambition matches specific key elements in the EU Green Deal proposals and some of the 17 UN Sustainability Development Goals. The 5 ambitions in the FIFAC Sustainability Charter are, first, that's to contribute to climate-neutral livestock and agriculture production through feed. According to FAO, feed production represents globally 45% of the carbon footprint of the livestock products. The second one is to foster sustainable food systems through increased resource and nutrient efficiency, and feed plays an important role here. The third is to promote responsible sourcing practices. I will come back to this ambition later. The fourth is to contribute to improving farm animal health and welfare through our feed. And the fifth is to enhance the socio-economic environment and the resilience in the livestock sector. You see here some of the key industry indicators where we will measure the development in the feed sector concerning the sustainability ambitions. The aim is to do that on both national and on aggregated EU level. The indicators we have here are starting with the feed conversion rate. It's a share of non-edible feed materials, which we already have heard a lot about today. It's a share of responsible and deforestation-free soy. It's our greenhouse gas reduction potential, and it is a share of EU protein on total feed protein use. Looking at these indicators, there can and there will be some everything else equal considerations, and in some cases also dilemmas where a little lower score on one indicator could bring positive effects on others. But with explanations, this toolbox can really make sense to measure the sustainability development in our sector. You see in the graph to the right a positive combination of 2 indicators. A very important goal for the compound feed industry is to make valuable use of the co-products and of byproducts from the food industry and from the bioenergy sector. You see on the blue graph that the European feed sector have increased the utilization of those products from around 22 million tons annually back in year 2000 up to now around 35 million tons annually. And soy-related byproducts are not included in this figure. Over the same 20 years, imported proteins, that's a green graph, have shown some decrease, an average decrease of around 5 million tons, and now is on a level of around 25 million tons. We are aiming to continue this development. And I shall maybe here mention that our total compound feed production last year was 164 million tons in the EU. We have in FIFAC since 2015 been working very actively to create a robust data tool on climate footprint for the feed sector through our PEF methodology for feed, and connected to this an international database for now around 1,500 raw materials. It's a database called GFFA, Global Metrics for Sustainable Feed. This has taken place in a close cooperation with our sister associations in North America, in Australia, the EU Commission, universities, and we have today a toolbox for climate measurements where we can optimize on feed components to reduce footprint and in a transparent way use it as a basis for climate labeling of feed. A few weeks from now, it's 3rd February, we will in FIFAC launch an upgrading of the soy sourcing guidelines. The first were launched back in 2015, and today 19 schemes are benchmarked, and the guidelines functions as a broad, international recognized pre-competitive toolbox to improve transparency concerning sustainable and responsible soy sourcing. When we are looking at deforestation-free soy, we estimate that at least 80% of EU soy supply today comes from areas with no or with a very low deforestation risk. Nearly half of the imported soy quantities to the EU are now fulfilling the responsibility criteria in the soy sourcing guidelines. It was 30% back in 2017. So this shows that the market pull is working. The main new element in the revision of the soy sourcing guidelines, which we launched here the 3rd of February, it will be a criteria concerning no deforestation or no conversion, including mechanisms to show how the different schemes in a transparent way will handle this no conversion criteria. On this slide, you see in the circle the sources of proteins for feed use in the EU. Almost 40% of our proteins comes from protein content in feeding grains. Soya meal, rapeseed meal, and sunflower meals covers another around 40%, and most of the remaining comes from other co-products. Let me short stress 3 points here. The first one is that it is important that we do not dilute the protein level in our feeding grain by too strong reductions in our nitrogen fertilizer norms, reminding the correlation between sufficient nitrogen and protein creation in the grain. There are some countries where we have some experiments on going a little bit too far here, and where the norms now have returned to a more realistic or more quality-based protein nitrogen balance level. The second point is that although we, with specific protein growing initiatives in the EU, will be able to expand the European protein crop production, we will still in the EU agriculture be highly dependent on open access to international markets to maintain our competitiveness. And the third point I want to stress here, that is that introducing the opportunity in the EU to use the new genome techniques, the NGTs, in the European plant breeding sector, it is crucial for the improvement of the competitiveness of and the sustainability of our EU crop production. And it will also be necessary to align our plant breeding rules with other parts of the world to maintain our participation in Europe in the international trade. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asbjørn. And we are just in time, and unfortunately we have not time to make a bigger discussion, but I see on the chat we have a lot of very deep going questions. Some of them are for the researcher, some of them are more for the political guys. So please use the deep dive for asking your questions, which are very interesting. We have to finish now this session, unfortunately, because time is over. From the scientific view, we have many options. I wouldn't say to reduce, but to improve the footprint. And we have already achieved noticeable results. So we will work on that also from the animal nutrition sector. That is our ambition. And with that ambition, I would thank you for your attention, and please use the deep dive for detailed discussion with our panelists. Keep well and healthy. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.